we can ensure that we have a quorum. And members of the public, you may introduce yourselves as well if you would like. So I'm Ginger McCall. I'm the Public Records Advocate, and I'm the chair of this council. Stephanie Clark, Secretary of State's Office. Rich Vile will be sitting on the council when he arrives. He'll be here shortly.
Tony Hernandez, I represent the members of the public.
Scott Winkles with the League of Oregon Cities.
Steve Tuo, I'm the editor with the Oregonian, professional journalist.
Great, and if others in the room want to go ahead and introduce themselves, please make sure that you speak up.
Chris Stenson, Manager of Records Management, Oregon State Archives.
We'll go to the back of the room.
Cameron Miles, Disney.
Trademark News and Publishing.
Justin Wright, Publishing Cox Office.
Ben Bodkin, State News Journal.
Andrew Salcedo, reporter of the Associated Press.
People introduce themselves. Who was sitting in the room?
I can't get it.
Mark Landauer is on the line.
All right, we've got everyone in the room, I think, now. There may be some additional...
Where's mute? Is that what you said?
For people who are on the phone, if you could just mute yourself unless you're speaking, we'd really appreciate it, because we're getting a little bit of background noise. It looks like we have a lot of people on the phone. Yeah, you don't all need to. You can just have the back members introduce themselves to make sure that we have someone that would help.
Ginger, this is Michael Crone. I'm on the phone.
Thank you.
This is Les Zeitz on the phone.
I got Les and
Mark Landauer is on the phone.
Kim Thatch is on the phone.
Josie Kerner, League. Oops, sorry. Josie Kerner, League of Women Voters, on the computer.
Lori Heeb, Oregon Newspaper Publishers.
Okay.
Hillary Boyd from the Oregonian.
Todd Albert, Deputy Public Records Advocate.
Thank you, Todd.
Sharon Khosravi, SKU Local 503.
Great, okay.
Ginger, Ginger, it's very difficult to hear you. Can you have everybody mute their phones if they're not speaking?
Yes, folks on the line, please mute your phones if you're not speaking.
Is that better?
Great. All right. Council members, anyone?
Rob Bovett, but I think you already had me down, Ginger.
I do, thank you.
And Liz Pick from DAS.
Okay, all right. I think that we got all the council members. So we'll go ahead and get started. It appears as though we do have a quorum. I want to thank all of you for being here, and I want to thank everyone for their support this week. I'm deeply appreciative of the support that folks have expressed for me and for this office. Because we want this to be a truly open meeting, we'll be reserving time at the end for public comments. We'll accept comments in person, on the phone, and via the GoTo meeting chat. Because we want to be sure we hear from everyone, we do ask for minutes or less. We would also welcome written comments, folks not able to stick around for that long or not comfortable with public speaking. Please submit written comments by next Friday. We have several legislative proposals before us that have been posted up on the website for everyone to review, but I don't necessarily expect that today we will be able to adopt a formal legislative proposal. My hope for this meeting is that we will come up with what we want in a legislative proposal. I can then work with folks who are knowledgeable about the specifics of government budgets and appointments, if necessary, to draft language that is appropriate for the proposal and in line with Oregon law and practice. At the end of this meeting, I would like us to schedule a follow-up meeting, preferably for the week of September 23rd, so that we can finalize that legislative language, hopefully before I depart in October. On the agenda before us, the first item is to review the circumstances of my resignation. So as you all have probably read by now, there were a series of meetings that I had with folks from the governor's office, specifically the general counsel and one of the policy advisors. And in those meetings, which are really better detailed in the memos, those memos were written contemporaneously, so they capture things a little better than I can. In those meetings, I was told that, in fact, the general counsel was my supervisor, that it was my role to serve the governor's interests here on the council, even potentially to the point of dissuading the council from particular policy proposals. I was also told that I was not to tell the council that. In the end, I found that this was an unworkable situation that put me in an unethical position, and as a result, I resigned from the position. So since then, I have had a meeting with the governor. She has asked me for my thoughts on this. I have given her several proposals, but I've also said that the council is planning on meeting and that the proposals really should come out of the council. So I'm looking to you to help to create proposals that will address this situation. And with that, I suppose I will answer the floor for questions from the council regarding what happened. Scott?
What was your understanding of the oversight when, at the point of your hire and during the confirmation process?
So at the point of my hire and during the confirmation process, it was my understanding that this was an independent office. I had a few exchanges with Emily and Misha at that point where I asked who I reported to. They said that it was kind of difficult because I was appointed by the governor. I kind of reported to the governor, also reported to the council, but that reporting was not supposed to be day-to-day management or political interference. It was supposed to be an independent office. So my understanding, as I think the public and the legislature understood as well, was that this was meant to be an independent office.
Okay. So I did my own requests too, and did my own chatting, as I would hope most people on this commission would do. I'm looking at the February 8th email. That as a practical matter, this is from Emily. As a practical matter, the governor's chief of staff and the council office will assist the governor in providing oversight. That's different to me than, I'm just not comfortable acting on proposals until we've had a thorough, complete review of this situation and we get a complete understanding of the circumstance. Because I don't feel like I have that now, and I've read through as much as, there were several documents, I don't think I've gotten through the public comment yet, but.
Excuse me, who's speaking? Can you identify yourself? Who's speaking, please?
This is Winkles, Scott Winkles.
Thank you.
So I think that is a fair point for this meeting. It was my understanding, again, I had a follow-up conversation with Emily and Misha after we had that email about how exactly this would work day to day. I was assured that this was an independent office. As the governor has said publicly, and before that, and also this week, this was meant to be an independent office. Oversight was meant to be for the abuse, like the dismissal for cause. If there was cause, that would be the oversight, but not that this office would represent the political interests of the governor's office, which is where we are right now, question that we're answering. So, I mean, if it's the will of the council that it not be an independent office, that's fine. And I said in my resignation letter that, you know, if I am wrong about my interpretation of the law and my understanding of this position, then that's fine. But what should not happen is that this should be to the public appearing as though it's an independent office and I'm an independent actor, and then I'm actually carrying water for an elected official. That, I think, is the problem here.
Okay.
Do others have thoughts or questions?
So I have, this is Tony. So I got a.
And make sure you speak up because we have a bunch of people on the line.
So this is Tony Hernandez. I got a few questions and then maybe just a quick something to say. I was wondering, in terms of the budget trouble this year, do you feel that the budget cuts were done in any kind of retaliation for you speaking up to General Counsel?
I can't, so there were two things that happened. The first was that we had originally had a budget package that would have increased our staff and our budget so that we would have admin support. That got cut. I have no idea why that got cut. I was not a part of that process. I was tipped off to that after hours at a casual, in a casual conversation by someone who knew about it. I can't speak to what the motivation behind those arrests and that was. As to, once I investigated, I then found out that there were going to be further cuts to the office's budget. I do not think that that part was politically motivated. What happened there is the DAS is still adjusting to the pay equity legislation. Todd's position and my position were both budgeted at step 2. However, when we were hired, and I didn't set our salaries, the salaries now under that legislation are set by HR. HR set both of our salaries at a step 9, which is why we were going to be in the hole. Unfortunately, when DAS estimated our budget, they estimated us both at a step 2 for next biennium. I also thought, I was thinking about this, and I do want to go back to your question about that reporting relationship. If indeed it is my role to report to both the governor and the council, then it would not have been appropriate for me to be serving the governor's interests without being able to disclose that to the council. And that is part of the issue here in my mind. If I'm reporting to you, it is my job to be clear and transparent and honest with you. And what I felt in the end, what made me uncomfortable, and you probably noticed that things felt a little off at that July meeting, that was why. Because I felt like I was in an impossible position. I couldn't speak, I couldn't tell you whose interests I was representing. That was the position.
Yeah. That's all right.
Do you have more questions?
Yeah, so I just want to say, I don't know if there's a time for us to talk about our overall impression, if this is it, or,
Yeah,
I don't know.
no.
Okay, so I just truly admire situations when people speak truth to power, and I just want to let people know that you knocked it out of the park with this one. I'm really sad for Oregon's leadership right now and a bit angry, and you know that at least at the federal executive branch, they're open with war on journalism, and here, this behavior that I've read about is even more concerning. So I don't really like closed door intimidation or reading about it or having you to take notes about it, and I'm really sorry that you have undergone that. I hate that I'm about to speak against the behavior of one of the people that reached out to me to sit on this council, but I think that the governor's former general counsel has tainted the crystal clear waters of truth. And to put it another way, I think that if trustworthy a paper that this group writes on the people that intimidated you or just kind of worked with you in these stories, just crumble that up. When you open that piece of paper again, those creases are going to be there. So what do I mean? So here's an example that actually the media hasn't covered yet, and we're in your notes. When you were talking about the legislation that we were working on earlier this year and that we compromised on, the general counsel mentioned that you said I pointed out that there were other representatives of state government on the council who could objected, and he said that there were reasons, several of them, not object, and that the DAS representatives should not have to shoulder the burden of objecting. That kind of sort of implicates the mission in a disingenuous fashion, and I don't believe that because I truly respected the people that sit on this commission and the work that we've done. But this guy just called out the commission, and I don't really appreciate that. And then in the notes with Emily, you mentioned that Emily recognized other state government directors who have better managed the relationships with the governor's office, especially the Government Ethics Commission, which again, an ethics commission that I value as independent. So all of this is really troubling to me, and I know that we may not be able to pass all these proposals this month or this meeting, but I see the two proposals that we're going to consider. One is seen more as our values, call to act, and our values and our call to respond to this situation, and the other one being what we're going to do about it. So I just kind of wanted to let my voice.
And I will say, at Emily's recommendation, reach out to Ron Burson of the Government Ethics Commission, because I too was also curious what the situation there was. And I had a conversation with him, and that conversation actually instilled me with confidence that he was, behaving the right way, serving the public. He told me that basically you have to do what you think is right.
Okay, that's great to know.
And that I was deeply concerned about that too when I had that conversation with Emily.
I really support the suggestion that you made at the NOPB of maybe trying to get this council to towards the Federal Government Ethics Commission model. So I hope that that's something that we at least consider as well.
Others have thoughts?
Yes, this is Rob Bovet. Would this be a good time for me to chime in and kind of explain what I crafted up, Ginger?
Let's hold off on that just a second. I want to just answer if people have other questions or thoughts on the situation, and then we can move to potential proposals and solutions, if that's all right with you.
That works for me.
Perfect, thank you. Does anyone else have questions or comments or thoughts on the situation, the resignation, any of that?
Hey, Ginger, this is Les.
Hi, Les.
A question. So since you submitted your letter to the governor, has the governor or anyone in the governor's office specifically challenged any of your specific factual statements?
No, well, not to my knowledge. Not in any public statement that I've read. I mean, the first statement was just, this is untrue, and then the memos about the meetings were released, and they walked that back to just, we didn't know. So that's, as far as I know, that's where things stand right now, unless there's been something issued that I'm not aware of. If anyone is aware of anything that's been issued since then, I would appreciate knowing about it.
Well, I was more concerned that there was any record to you that contested or challenged your recitation of events or your documentation.
No,
and as I understand you, that there has not been any, right?
No, I mean, I haven't checked my email in the last half an hour or so, so I can't say what's there right now, but as of the last time I checked, there was nothing about that. And in my meeting with the governor, she also didn't say anything about that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to briefly respond to Scott. I very much appreciate your desire not to rush to judgment. I also appreciate that this council has overwhelmingly worked by consensus throughout our existence. I will say we've been offered very compelling evidence by Ginger that we should be deeply concerned about the independence of this office. And at the very least, I think we can agree, even had this not happened, it would behoove us to make clear in statute that the intent of the legislature is that this office be independent, and that we institutionalize measures to make that happen and make the future public records advocate protected.
Does anyone else on the council have any thoughts?
Well, this is Les again. I'd like to build on what Steve said, that I think we don't need to be a jury, so to speak, to decide the factual circumstances. I think they are troubling enough on the face of it, number one. Number two, they bring into pretty sharp focus principles of the operation of this office and of this council. And frankly, I think that's where we ought to turn our time and attention to this afternoon.
Thank you, Les. Does anyone else on the phone have any thoughts on this question? And I'm here, I am happy to answer any of the questions that you have. I mean, I appreciate Scott's point that, we do need to clarify what happens here. What I don't want is for us to just shoot off some legislative proposal that's not well thought out. I don't like reactionist legislative proposals, so, we should be thoughtful about this, which is why I don't think that we should necessarily be putting forth a legislative proposal out of this meeting. We should just be talking about what we would potentially want in one, if we want one.
Do we understand that the council has independent ability to introduce bills in the legislative session?
Could you please identify the speaker?
Yeah, this is Rich File, Deputy Secretary of State.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
That is a good question, Deputy Secretary. The way that we had done this last time, when I got here, we put together some legislative proposals, and this is something that I had flagged for what we should discuss later for sure. We put together the legislative proposals. They were reviewed by the Secretary of State's office. They were submitted as legislative concepts by the deadline. I think it was in June of that year. Later, we came back and decided the governor's office decided that those legislative concepts were not going to be included in their policy package. So in light of that, I was told that I needed to find representatives to introduce them. I went to the Capitol and I found representatives in December. I found 4 people to co-sponsor our bills. But the question, and we raised this question in the July meeting as well, is how we want to move forward with proposing legislative concepts. That is a question that we do need to deal with if we're going to talk about independence.
May I speak to that?
Sure.
Because Cameron can weigh in here, but I did speak with the Legislative Counsel's office about this question, and it does say in statute that state agencies can have legislation introduced, but it must be approved by the governor, or by separately by other elected, Secretary of State, Attorney General, those bodies, those constitutional officers also have the opportunity to introduce legislation directly. We would have to either go through the governor or find a sponsor in the legislature.
So happily for us, we do have 2 members of the legislature on this council. We could potentially look to them, and they were co-sponsors of our prior bills, Rep. Power and Senator Thatcher. That is another method by which we can get bills introduced, but I mean, I leave it to you all to determine how you want to do that.
Can you talk about your experience lobbying yourself for our bills without the bills being on the governor's priorities?
I mean, I found out about that very late. At the time, I felt that it was, my job to make sure that the concepts that we came up with did get introduced. So I went around and knocked on doors. I made appointments ahead of time, which apparently isn't necessary, strictly speaking. I dressed myself up in my fanciest outfit, and I saw that there were people in jeans and cowboy boots. But, I did my best, and we did manage to find the 4 co-sponsors. I mean, I was scrambling. I was left to scramble on that. And I'm happy that we did manage to get the bills introduced. So, as was in the documents, there were complexities around getting the annual reporting bill passed, which I think were unfortunate. Does anyone else on the phone have comments or questions?
Yes, this is Karen Power. I will not take it personally if the council wants to find another way to introduce bills in any way. But I, of course, will continue to support the council's work. And so I'm committed to continuing to introduce the bills that you put forward. So you can have my assurance on that.
Thank you so much. And thank you again to Rep. Power and to Senator Thatcher for being co-sponsors of the bills that we got introduced. I really, really appreciated that. And for advocating for those bills. I really appreciate it.
Karen, this is Rich Vile. Are you limited in the number of bills that you can introduce in the short session?
Hi, Rich. I am. I have 2 personal bills. And then as committee chair of an unrelated committee, I have 3 others, I believe.
Okay, thanks.
And I will also say I have not heard anything from the governor's office about whether or not they would be willing to introduce things on behalf of this council if we do decide that we want to make legislative proposals. So I will leave that to them to answer that question.
So I think as just a statement of independence, it would be preferable if we could find a legislative sponsor, or if we were to propose this. It's also possible that we could propose legislation to the legislature at large and hope that it finds a sponsor. There is the problem of the limited bandwidth for each individual member in the short session, but I think that would be the optimal way to go. And if Representative Power were so generous to do that, then it'd be great.
Thank you, Steve.
Hey, this is Kim Thatcher, and I'm willing to sign on to that, and we are more limited on the Senate side, just FYI. It seems a little backwards, but the Senate the members only get one bill, and as opposed to the two on the other side. But I'm sure we can find a way to get it introduced as a committee bill somewhere along the line.
Thank you very much, Senator Thatcher. All right, does anyone else have comments or thoughts on any of this, the circumstances, the legislative questions?
Dumb question, sorry, for my lack of
There are
knowledge.
no dumb questions.
Lack of knowledge of how laws and processes work, but is there a way to propose a law that this council gets 1 or 2 proposals a year per session?
That it is not a dumb question at all. I don't know the answer to that.
So,
I think that all agency bills have to go through the governor. Cameron is going to answer that question.
Cameron Miles, Legislative Council. The Senate and House adopt their own rules, and they decide who will get to submit concepts for measures. So they would have to decide that they will give the council additional measures to be introduced into legislation.
And I can tell you that even though, this is Rich Weil again, even though the Secretary of State's office is an independent office, we do not have an unqualified right to introduce bills, either in the long session or the short session. We have to either find a sponsor among the legislative body or get gubernatorial approval. So it would probably take a fairly significant change to existing rules to get that in.
Thank you very much.
And
sorry, go ahead. I have a question. I have a question. Sorry, I'm just a concerned citizen. My name is Ray Ozioski, and I was just wondering how was your position created? What work was done ahead of time? What guidelines were provided? I mean, I don't understand how we could be in a position to open something of this importance without a real roadmap as to how to achieve it. I mean, maybe this will come under your later on in the meeting under remedies, but I mean, how did we get here is my question.
I want to answer this question. I would ask for members of the public, please reserve your comments. We're going to have space for public comments at the end before we vote on anything, because I think that would
okay. All right. I'm sorry, but please remember.
No, I appreciate your participation in this, and I do want to make sure that people have an opportunity to voice their thoughts on this. So my understanding, and I wasn't here in the state when this legislation happened, but my understanding is that there were a number of political compromises around the legislation that created this office. I mean, I have identified in the time that I've been here that there are some ambiguities in that statute, likely as a result of those compromises. And maybe some of those ambiguities were even purposeful in order to sort of allow people to find middle ground. And I think this is the moment where we can potentially clarify that and ensure that things are clear going forward.
So one of the people who negotiated 106 in the 17th session, what I will say is that we had actually lobbied against and argued against the complete autonomy of the PRA position. It's just not a model. It's not a model for any agency that we've found to be completely effective or helpful when we're resolving issues with agencies, whether it's OGEC or the OLCC or others. So to make this change is actually rolling back agreements and conversations that were made to establish it in the first place. And doing that in the short session this quickly, I have concerns over. I find it unsettling.
Let's see. So, all due respect, Scott, it's apparently not working. I mean, whatever compromises were made, I mean, we now have the benefit of some history, and there need to be more sideboards than there are now.
Okay. I think we do need to actually relook at the structure, but that's why I would go back to my original suggestion about a full and complete review of these circumstances and hear in depth what everybody's understanding was and when they had it before we move forward with correction. And I've had to go through I've seen legislation get passed, and we spent a long time trying to fix that. It's not the road I would choose to go down again.
So that is the question to the council. Do we want to do something? And then the secondary question, do we want this office to be independent? I will tell you, it is my strong opinion that this office cannot be effective if it's not independent. And if the office isn't independent, particularly budgetarily independent, it is subject to the political whims of partisan elected officials, and that is not going to create an office that the public trusts. What has happened here is the very reason why the public is cynical about government. And if we want an office that the public can trust, it has to be an independent office. And I say that as someone who has occupied this office, who has faced the threats of the independence. I feel very strongly about that, and I will also say I suspect you will have a very difficult time finding a qualified candidate to fill this position if this is the scenario that they're going to be operating under.
This is Les.
Sorry, Les, go ahead.
Well, I'll weigh in. I think we need to sort of pull back a little bit and realize who we are serving here. We are not serving our independent constituencies that brought us to service on the council. We're serving the people of Oregon in a way to provide them the greatest possible access to information about their government. And a part of that is that the citizens of Oregon have faith and trust in this body to represent those interests in openness and effective government. And I think, given what's happened in recent days, it is incumbent upon us to make it clear to the people that we are serving here that that independence is vital to our operations, but more important, is vital to their trust in our ability to serve those interests in openness and candor and transparency. And I don't think that principle requires months and months of debate and argument. If all we did was declare in some fashion that the Public Records Advocate and the Public Records Advisory Council are independent, focused on serving the best interests of the public, I think we have advanced the performance of the council considerably.
Getting some strange feedback. Okay. Thank you, Les. I will also point out that per the statute that created this council, the council's goal is to make recommendations on changes in law, policy, and practice that can enhance transparency in public process and government and facilitate rapid dissemination of just want to point that out.
I do think, this is Rich Vile again. I do think it's important for us to recognize, however, that there may be some complications that are not quite as simple as you described them, Les. One of the biggest ones is the budgeting process. Our budgeting process here in the state does not really allow for the independence of any agency. Even the Secretary of State doesn't get to determine what its budget is and how we're going to operate. You have to go through the legislative process. So while I understand your desire to express in as simple a terms as possible the need to make independence the primary focus of the office, it's not going to be as easy as just saying it. There's other issues that have to be addressed.
And I think that's a really good point, Deputy Secretary. And I think this is a place where I didn't expect us to actually be drafting proposed legislation in this meeting. What we're going for here is what our goals are in legislation that we would want to draft. Any question about how the budget is actually going to operate is going to require a level of expertise that I don't know that anyone who's sitting here in this meeting or on the phone on the council necessarily has. I do know that the second concept that was passed out here does contain language that was listed directly from the original bill to create this office, which allowed the legislature to set aside a public records advocate fund. So that's why I included that language in that legislative proposal, because that was in fact from the first introduced process. But the question of, how exactly the budget looks, that will require some expertise, I think, from government budgeting folks, we'll need to talk to. So I'm hoping today, what we will do is come up with goals for what we would like to include in that legislation, and then we will have to have other meetings to discuss how that actually looks in legislative language. And I will also remind folks that we here on this council serve the public. The public is watching us. And for every elected official on this council, for every government employee on this council, that is something that we should be aware of. If in the face of this, in the face of what I've seen, is pretty clear public comment in favor of independence of this office. If we do nothing, that has implications for the public support of the future of this office.
I'm sorry, if we go back a little bit, I want to help complete some of my understanding. We're going through the documents. It does not appear to me that there was ever any interference or pressure or anything that you've alleged on as it relates to the actual mediation work.
Not to the mediation, the pressure was as relates to my role as the chair of this council, which is where the governor's office apparently parts the independence.
Yeah. And they didn't question any of your training schedule, barring budget financial expenses, but.
No, it was just the policy proposals, my job, my role on the council as the chair.
So this is focused specifically on the legislative change piece. Is that
it was
fair?
Focused on, as my role as chair of the council, I think generally that their belief was that my role was to serve the interests of the governor's office and to be able to anticipate the particular political ramifications of any proposal made by this council, and I imagine that could be a policy or a legal or a legislative proposal. I was to anticipate the governor's interests and to deal with those proposals accordingly. And I will note, it was even, we had a conversation about what my role was for the council, that this is a democratic body, and the democratic body gets to make decisions about what proposals it comes to, and am I supposed to derail those proposals? And the answer was essentially yes. So, that was why I was upset, and that was why it was an impossible position. Because I am here as your chair. I am not here to make decisions for all of you. That is why we're having this conversation right now.
This is Steve Suo. It's the council's indulgence. I'd like to go on. I had prepared some support my legislative concept that I sent along last night, but I think if it's okay, I'll go ahead and take them and make these remarks now. Kind of pulling together some of the history of all this and kind of where I come down on it. The beautiful thing about this group is that we represent all of the interests that have a stake in Oregon public records law. From the requester side to the side of government dealing with records requests day in, day out. As I alluded to before, 2 years ago, we got together this diverse set of interests and formulated a process for selecting the records advocate. We poured through resumes, we interviewed candidates, and again, despite our wide array of perspectives, we came up with a remarkable consensus behind 3 nominees. And when Ginger McCall was selected as a finalist, we were all extremely enthusiastic. Not only is she a passionate advocate for transparency, but I think she also is a good listener and brings a very balanced view to both the interests of requesters and government bodies. From there, we sat down and got to work on legislative proposals and what was needed to fulfill the mission of our office. Ginger felt it was very important that we be able to gather basic data on how many records requests are being filed, how they're being handled, and we came up with a proposal to do that. We also oversaw her first public records report to the state that identified some important obstacles, barriers to access. And we're very happy with that, I can say. I think we now know that some of our beliefs about this process were naive, at least I feel that mine were. I think we were naive to believe that our deliberations and our efforts to reach consensus would actually be embraced. I believe that our job is to, and as is Ginger's, to recommend improvements to public records law on our collective knowledge and understanding of what's best for Oregonians. And I think trust in that process has been undermined. I think it's really important that we take every measure we can at this point to make sure that the public has confidence that this body is truly independent. We need to make sure that this never happens again. What happened to Ginger McCall should not happen again. I think the law, so to my proposal, and I think some of these overlap with what other people have recommended. I think the law needs to state explicitly that the records advocate is independent, and we need to institutionalize that independence. The council, not the governor, should directly appoint the records advocate. Now, the council, again, appointed by and large by the governor. So there is accountability there. There is no truly, completely independent body without input from elected officials. The law should also make clear that any co-location with another state agency is for administrative purposes only, that being the Secretary of State's office or budgetary and the Chief Operating Officer's office. Finally, we think we need a dedicated funding mechanism. I think budget threats are a time-honored tactic for taming public agencies. And to Mr. Vile's point, I hear you loud and clear. The legislature's elected to fund the budget. That's its mandate. My understanding from the Government Ethics Commission is that they have not had a problem with the legislature messing with their budget since they've had a dedicated funding source. That by and large, their request, there's oversight to their request, there is due diligence, but there has not been political interference. And I think that offers an effective model. I think the Government Ethics Commission adopted this model a decade ago. There are funds collected from both state and local agencies, and it developed specifically shielding punitive budget cuts. To my knowledge, it's working well, at least based on my inquiries. Now, I know, Scott, you've raised objections about this. I would offer on the other side that the Public Records Advocate has trained thousands of public employees, many of them in local government. And she also has offered mediation services and answered requests from the public in some 200 odd instances, and that benefits all public bodies and the public serve. And so I think all of us, including local governments, have an interest in stable funding for this office that is not subject to interference. So I do think it's important that as Les said, not spend months talking, hashing this out. At least we can commit today to a core principle that that we need to agree to agree. Move forward.
Rob, I know you had a proposal too. I wanted to make sure that you had a chance to talk about that.
Sure. And I guess I would first off echo what Steve just said, as well as what I heard Tony say a bit earlier. You know, the first thing that I did, because I'm a lawyer, is I looked up Senate Bill 106 and then our own bill that amended Senate Bill 106, which, by the way, doesn't go into effect until January 1st of 2020, which is important for another reason I'll get to in a brief moment. But addressing some of the issues around independence, we have some constraints here in Oregon. I don't know if they apply in other states, but you know, our Constitution in Oregon sets up a separation of powers pretty clearly. It basically says the governor is the head of the executive branch, and it has special constitutional carve-outs for pieces of the executive branch that other statewide elected officials have power over, such as Secretary of State and on and on. So that's how our Constitution is structured. But as Scott has already referenced and Steve has already referenced, what I read in 106 as amended by our own bill, it's really wonky. And I agree with the characterization. There's a lot of gray space there, and it doesn't fit neatly within anything else that I've ever experienced in Oregon government. And so what I crafted, which is your draft one, I didn't do the other two, I think Ginger did those. And draft one is, all I did was I just borrowed the existing statutory language out of the Oregon Liquor Control Commission statutes in ORS Chapter 471, as well as the Oregon Ethics Commission statutes in ORS Chapter 244, which basically set up a scene that very much just the way Steve described, which is the governor appoints the council, and the council hires the administrator, in this case, the advocate. That's the same model that the Ethics Commission operates off of and the OLCC operates off of, and I suspect that's safe from separation of powers problems. I don't know how far we can go before we get into those separation of powers problems. I haven't done the research yet because I just haven't had time. And so that's why I created the first draft. It wasn't in any thought that we would adopt it today, recommend it today. It was just a conversation starter. If you wanted to look at what the state law would look like if we just adopted that Ethics Commission or OLCC model to give the advocate that independence from the governor's office that is being called for. Now, with that, I'll just add a couple of minor technical points. One is the Oregon Constitution basically says the Senate confirms gubernatorial appointees, not anybody else. And so in some of the later drafts, we'd probably need to clean that up. So if the council was truly hiring the advocate, it wouldn't be a Senate appointment of the advocate. The council itself would still have to be Senate confirmed, but not the advocate. In terms of the budget, I don't have anything to add other than I would just echo what Rich said, which is the legislature really controls that whole show unless we do something like Steve described, which is create a dedicated funding system. But I guess I haven't heard enough factual information to show that they were trying to play shenanigans with the budget. That was just a bunch of whoops, it sounds like to me, unlike the whole independence problem, which is kind of the bigger issue here. So I put that on the table for everyone's consideration. I think there are ways to draft it that look real familiar to other state agencies. I get Scott's reluctance, I do. We have struggled with the Ethics Commission at times, certainly at times the OLCC, but I don't know if that's because of the independence of the administrators of those two agencies. Maybe it is, but I haven't personally experienced a problem with Ron Burson, for example, having independence, or Steve Marks up at OLCC having independence. You know, basically Steve reports to his commission and, you know, Ron reports to his commission, and under what I crafted for you, essentially the advocate would report to the council and would work in that same manner. Now, the last thing I'll mention, and then I'll be quiet because I've talked way too long already, is the part of the law that is in effect right now that I just want the council to be aware of is we're required to, within 30 days of Ginger's vacating her current office, we are required to meet as a council and start the process of selecting a new public records advocate. We have to do that within 30 days, and it has to be the only thing on our agenda, and the Secretary of State will be the chair of our council once Ginger vacates. I just wanted to flag that to you, and because the new law is not in effect yet, we wouldn't be limited or circumscribed to just providing 3 names. It would default to the original Senate Bill 106 language, but that's further down the road. But I just wanted to flag that all for you, and I'll stop talking right now.
Great, thank you, Rob. And that 30 days, that starts from when I vacate the office, so that would be October 11th.
Yes, that would start. That clock would start ticking as soon as your office is vacant.
Yeah, I like your proposal. I like that it's lifted from another existing office. I had a few questions as I was going through it, which we can address, but I want to make sure that others have a chance to speak here. Tony, you had something to say.
Just to clarify, 30 days to select the person, or just to meet the person?
To meet, to start that process.
Yeah, to meet. We have to meet with one item on the agenda, and that being starting the process for the selection.
And it's my understanding that I get to participate in that process under the current statute, correct?
That is correct. That's my reading of 106, as well as the new statute will go into effect January 1. So, and I only mention that because if the council decides to forward names to the governor prior to January 1, it can be any number of names, but after January 1, it has to be 3 names.
Thank you, Rob. Do others have thoughts or comments?
Just to follow up on, sorry, go ahead. We haven't heard from you.
Well, this is Les again. As I'm listening to the discussion, I understand the technical implications of assessing, particularly the budget and the processes for legislation. Those are logistical issues that I think perhaps a subset of the council could work on. It seems to me that our primary focus at the moment ought to be, as a council, as a matter of public policy, do we want to make clear that the Public Records Advocate is an independent resource for the citizens of Oregon that reports to the council? I think the other things are, the devil's always in the details, but I would prefer that the council focus on that primary issue first, because if the council decides as a body that it doesn't believe in independence, then the conversation's over. So I would propose that we work off of either Rob or Steve's proposals in concept. I don't think this is the time to be framing specific legislative language, but I think in concept, let's resolve the primary point on the table to moment, and then we can dig down into the details.
I think that's a good point. And it could be that the budget question is a little bit too complex for us to be able to resolve at this moment. So perhaps it would be best for us to just focus on the independents and who selects the advocate.
This is Rich Vile again. I certainly appreciate, and I think that it's without question that the Secretary of State's office would support the idea of independence. Secretary of State feels strongly about its independence, and yet there remain questions about how we operate. Unfortunately, the devil's in the details. And let's say we proceed with a clear understanding that we're going to ask the legislature to amend the current statute to create clearer independence for the office and address budget issues at the same time. The reality is timing for that means that even if we had a meeting, say, November 6th, which is within that 30-day period from the time Ginger's resignation is effective, we're still several months out until February of 2020 before we have a legislature going to convene, unless an emergency session were called, which I'm very dubious is going to occur around this issue. It could, I'm not saying it won't, but I'm dubious that it would. So I think we have sufficient time to let this percolate a bit. I think it's important that we continue to look at the evidence that has been provided by Ginger. We look at all of the realities of the political process that will be impacting how we went forward on this, and not get out over our skis and do something that, again, we may regret later. And Steve and Les, I absolutely appreciate your desire to be quick about the process. I really do. But I'm anxious that it might not be the most prudent way to go.
Well, this is Les, if I may address that. Rich, I appreciate the general caution, but it does seem to me that we can act without being precipitous to, at a minimum, carve out the proposed change as Rob and Steve have outlined, making the advocate an appointee of the council, and that process, and making clear in statute you know, on the budget issue, I mean, we just started a budget cycle, so the issue of resolving the budgeting is less pressing, and certainly will be less pressing for the public. You know, issues of whether how legislation is proposed. Again, we have able legislators serving on the council that can certainly carry the workload for the immediate needs, and then that provides the council plenty of time to consider more thoughtfully those technical issues that both you and Rob have raised. I think, frankly, we would be negligent if we walked away from today's meeting sort of shrugging our shoulders and saying, well, we'll talk about this some more, Oregonians. We can't really settle on whether this is an independent office in service to you. I think that sends an absolute wrong message to the people of this state, and that's not a part of a message I want to be involved in.
I concur.
I have another question, just to build off on that. This is Tony. Is a resolution binding for us, or is just approving a statement coming out of today's meeting, however it looks? I mean, I guess that's what I was trying to do with what I wrote up, not necessarily saying what we need to do moving forward technically or procedurally. There's people that are way more intelligent and have a lot more experience in writing that up than I do, but you know, I'm totally happy to amend or change or delete or write up something new, but I think it's absolutely important that that I agree. I think we should vote on something and at least respond to this. And I'll tell you why. And again, this comes down to trust, public trust for our government at a time when it's really shaky for a lot of people. And I was laid off by the Oregonian, and I still continue to value and admire journalism and its role in government. And not only that, but the people that are outside that work in law firms, that work in, I mean, there was a story, I can't remember which city, but one of the Pamplin papers covered that a regular resident wanted notes from I think a city council person and a municipal judge, that those notes weren't, municipal judge. Oh, I'm sorry, some sort of circuit court, thank you. Judge said they weren't open. So like, I think that, you know, I am now continuing to study journalism, and I'm going to be an independent creator that's going to rely on these laws as well if I have to request some records. And if the corporate journalism companies can't even keep up with the litigious costs to whenever they can't find remedies through administrative procedures, then what does that say for a single guy, a lone independent person versus or the other groups? And so I think this body acting to stand up for its independent values will say something to the overall state about the original mission that we were created to do.
Last, this is Rich Vile again. Following on Tony's observation, are you suggesting that we would agree a draft legislative change today and ask for an emergency session to get that passed, or are you simply suggesting that we adopt a conceptual agreement and look toward the next session of the legislature for some changes to be made?
Thanks, Rich. This is Les. No, I'm certainly not proposing that we solidify any language today or that we seek any sort of special session. I think we do aim a basic reform for the short session, as Representative Power and Senator Thatcher have said that they would be willing to support. And I think the more narrowly we focus that legislative proposal for the special session, the less turbulence we're going to have to establish the core principle of independence. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I think we're not disagreeing on what maybe would be the appropriate action to be taken today.
I mean, it was my intention. I was not the one who called this meeting per se, but I was asked to call the meeting. But it was my intention going into this, as I said at the beginning, that we would come up with proposals for what we would potentially want to have in a legislative concept. The actual drafting of a legislative concept is a more intensive process that I would not expect us to be able to accomplish today anytime before midnight. I think we would need to have a series of meetings before we could do that. We are under a bit of time pressure because, again, once I have vacated this office, the council is going to have to turn exclusively to hiring my replacement. And I will say, I don't usually read the comment section, but I have read the comment section about these stories, and I have seen literally hundreds of comments in favor of the independence of this office. I have been following this matter on Twitter. I have received emails from people, and I will tell you that the clear consensus from the public, the marching orders that we have, are to shore up the independence of this office. And if we fail to do that, then I am glad that I am no longer, because I don't think this can be an effective office or an effective council if we don't act on this.
This is Rob Bovett again. With that being said, if I could just lay a motion on the table, I know we're not going to act on it until after we hear from public comment, but I'll just put a concept out there. So I would move that the council approve the concept that the Public Records Advocate and the Public Records Advisory Council should be independent to the maximum extent permitted under the Oregon Constitution.
I think that's a good idea. And I think I did promise that we would hear public comment. So let's have that idea on the table. That's a good idea. I did promise that we would hear public comment before we would make any decisions on this, and we've set aside half an hour for public comment. Again, to members of the public, we are so glad that you are here. We serve you, and we want to hear your opinions on this. We would ask, however, that you limit those opinions to 2 minutes out of respect for everyone else who may want to comment. I'm sorry, Scott, you had one more thing.
I'm not being antisocial. The speaker was just a little bit too much.
Okay, sorry. Scott has moved back from the speaker because it was a little too loud. We want everyone in the room to be able to hear this. Sorry, Steve, were you?
Would it be in order now to speak to Rob's proposal, or is it a motion on the?
I don't know. What do you all think would be appropriate?
Well, this is last. Number one, we need a second for Rob's motion, and I'll provide that second, Rob. Secondly, Rob, would you accept a friendly amendment to also include the provision that the council appoints the advocate, or do you think that's a technical detail that has to be dealt with later as we unfurl the concept?
I think that goes hand in hand with it. I would accept that friendly amendment, but I wouldn't want to lose anybody on the council by doing so, since we're going to work on this legislation in future meetings.
Well, I won't go any farther than that. That's as far as I would go as a friendly amendment, if anyone else would accept that.
I'm good with that, Les.
At this point, I think we should probably accept public comment. And again, to the public, we would usually accept public comment throughout these meetings, but because there are so many people who are involved and we wanted to ensure that the council had a chance to have this important conversation, we have asked people to reserve comments till the end. But we will ask you now, if you have comments, to go ahead and make those. I know that GoToMeeting allows people to comment via the chat window there. I know that there are also folks on the phone. This is going to be a little bit difficult to manage because there are so many folks on the phone. I think we'll start off with folks in the room. So if anyone in the room has public comments at this point, please do feel free to step forward. And again, I would ask, in the interest of just courtesy to everyone who might want to comment and courtesy to the members of this council who are spending their time here late on a Friday, that everyone keeps their comments to 2 minutes. So folks in the room, Rory, go ahead.
Can I come sit?
Yeah, please come up and sit in the middle in front of the speaker so everyone can hear you. Oh, over there.
Thank you. Hi, everybody, members of the council and public records advocate call. My name is Roy Bielostowski. I'm the plaintiff and now the appellant in the public records case against the Westland City Councilor. I drove down today because I'm familiar with the importance of the public records advocate office, because I was fortunate enough to be able to use them in my dispute at the early stages before we went to court. But I share the view that I think that the office should be independent, And I wanted to just say that in response to some discussion, the Office of the Public Records Advocate serves as a mediator, and perception matters. So I think it's a slippery slope when you get into whether the governor's office is seeking to exert influence over legislative affairs versus the mediation aspect, because I think down the road you could have interference in mediation, because imagine being a member of the public seeking records from a state agency, and then would you go to mediation with an office that you don't know to be independent from the state agency? Like, I know the governor's not, she's kind of a state agency, her office, but I just think that the public trust in this office, and especially the mediation component, now that these revelations have come forward, it's essential that something be done to enshrine it in the law that the office is independent, because of just the conflict, the appearance of a conflict in mediation now that, personally, I wouldn't call the Public Records Advocate Office now if I was in a dispute, or down the road mainly, but if I was in a dispute against a state agency over public records, I might be reluctant to call the Public Records Advocate Office to mediate, thinking, are they going to come in and try to, will the agency send a memo over to the Public Records Advocate saying, hey, can you just do this for me because I need it? So I just think it's important, and that's my message, is that perception matters, and I think the perception now requires fixing, which is a legislative fix to that law to stay independent. So thank you.
Thank you. Others in the room? Yeah, go ahead, step up. Introduce yourself.
John Stevens, I'm out of Central Oregon. I do independent investigative journalist stories. I'm a private investigator. Been working in the world of the arena of public records for probably 40 years. Until she showed up, it's just been a nightmare. I mean, she's been very beneficial. We need someone like her. I had to sue recently for public records over in Central Oregon with a government entity that blatantly just said, I'm not going to give you the records. Didn't matter what we said, what we did, they didn't care. There's no teeth in anything. So as I'm not like corporate media, like we got some folks here from the, the mainstream media. They make a call, they're going to get a little more action. I make a call, we don't care. So her office has really helped us. She helped us with our case. It's very important that we get some sort of clarification on how she's going to operate, or her predecessor, and things of this nature. I just think we need to say that. And no matter what happens out here in public records, whenever we're going out there, the government bodies they poo-poo everything. There needs to be some way to spotlight what we're doing out here to bring greater transparency, accountability, and honesty, because I'm not seeing it. I've been doing this since '75. Just since she showed up, we're starting to really see, we got some hope. Now she's gone. And thank you for coming out to Crooked River Ranch and helping us. She's a gem. We're losing someone that we shouldn't be losing.
Anyone else in the room?
Hello, Ginger, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I'm sorry, this is Mark Landauer. I have been on the call the whole time. For some reason, my audio has not worked. So I just want you to be aware that I've been on the call for the entire time since the beginning. So thank you.
Oh, Mark, I'm so sorry about that. I know what that's like. I've been on calls like that before. I'm really sorry about that.
So, forgive me.
Anyone else in the room who wants to comment? All right, folks on the phone line, any members of the public who have comment, or do we have any members, anyone who's commented on GoToMeeting? I can't. Okay. Thoughts or comments on the phone line?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Wow! I didn't have the audio line on. This is Brittany Ruiz, and I'm a parental rights advocate, and we are really, really going to be at a huge loss with you leaving, Ginger. So I'm just leaving public comment to put there that I have done a number of public records requests, and I'm very concerned about specifically legislative counsel in the Capitol not having someone who's independent over them specifically, and I don't know what we're going to do if we don't have somebody that's replaced, because I believe there's a lot of nefarious things going on in that place, and I would really like to make sure that someone is put in your place that is as awesome as you were. That's it.
Thank you. Any others on the phone line?
Fine.
If I can kind of hear someone, but
I have a comment, I have a question on the chat.
Yes.
So Alan Kessler asks, I wonder if Ms. McCall would be willing to discuss whether her office has experienced any pressure from other political entities, such as agencies or municipalities, who she provided training to.
Okay. So I had minor issues with the city of Portland and getting a training up there. We ended up getting it sorted out. I think that was pretty much the only other issue that I had. And I will say, when the former Secretary of State Richardson was here, I can say nothing but nice things about his office's respect for this office's independence. I had several interactions with folks in his office, and they were very careful to respect the independence of this office. So I don't necessarily think that for every elected official, this would necessarily be a question. Other comments or thoughts, questions on the phone line?
Ginger, this is Les. So we do have a motion on the table, so I think we should return to that motion for council discussion and action on that.
Les, folks, can I jump in here? Again, this is Mark Landauer, and for those of you who don't know me, I am a member of the advisory committee. I'd just like to make a brief comment, if I may, before we return to the motion, if that's okay, Les.
By all means.
Oh, thank you. So, Ginger, I personally want to say that I have deep respect for you and what you have done over the last year and a half. I really have had a great deal of confidence in you, and I'm really sad that you got put into the position that you have been. So I want you to know that I deeply respect not only your decision, although I regret that you'll be leaving as the chair of the committee. I wanted to just make that brief statement before we move to business. The other just brief comment I'd like to make before we move to the motion is just, I don't want us to rush to decisions here, and I think that has been made already a couple of times. I'm a little bit nervous about the motion that is on the table, but I'm certainly willing to go forward with it, understanding that we'll have a more fleshed out concept at a later time. But I really do want to emphasize my concern about rushing to judgment on a matter here where we've got to be careful to ensure that we do this properly and in a manner that will work and will certainly, by all means, ensure that the public can have trust not only in the advocate but also in the committee itself. So that's all that I'd like to say at this point, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, another comment from the public?
Okay, so BJ is the only name on there. Comment. I second what was posted earlier. There was a comment earlier regarding the advocate being accountable to people. Sorry, I didn't put that in earlier. I want the advocate to be accountable to the people. That assumes that the person should be accountable to directly. Public trust in the Oregon government is near 0% at the present time. Thank you, Ms. McCall, for your integrity. You will be missed. We need more like you.
All right, so I think that we do have a motion on the table. Do you mind reading that back to me, or Rob, do you mind restating that motion?
Yeah, no problem. The motion is for the council to support the concept that the Public Records Advocate and the Public Records Advisory Council should be as independent as allowed by the Oregon Constitution, and that the advocate should be a direct hire by the council.
So that was the motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All right.
May I speak to it?
Sure.
So one suggestion, Rob, I certainly support both those provisions. How would you feel about we support the independence to say we support creating measures to ensure independence in statute?
You bet. I accept that as a friendly amendment. No problem, because that I think is the concept, is that we're just laying out a concept and we're going to try to put flesh on the bones in the next month or two.
One more observation, I guess. I think this element that Bob, the specific proposal, advocate appointed by the council, seems like certainly the most straightforward and simple piece of language that could conceivably come out. And so for those who might be against this concept, I would just make that point. I don't think this is something that needs to be hashed out at length. The budget issue, that's a different story. I may suggest as a separate motion, I want to include at least the proposal. But I will not.
So does anyone else want to speak to this particular motion? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Let's do a poll so that we know who is actually voting.
All right. So folks on the phone, we're just going to go through real quick, and we're going to have you state who you are, and if you're an aye. All right. So in the room, ayes, we have Steve. Okay. Scott, your position?
No.
No. Okay. Tony.
I'm sorry. This is Sharon. I heard a friendly amendment, but can we read what exactly is being voted on again, please?
So the motion is that the council supports the concept that the public records advocate and the council should be as independent as allowed by the Oregon Constitution, and that the advocate should be a direct hire of the council. Is that correct?
The first part of the phrase, that it should be established in statute that the council is.
Let me just take that note. All right. The resolution is, it should be established in statute that, I'm sorry, Steve, do you want to clarify that? Because when we had talked before, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Yeah, I don't have the.
You want me to read it? Yeah.
It should be established in statute that the council should be as independent as allowable in the Oregon Constitution.
The advocate and the council.
Advocate.
It should be established in statute that the advocate and the council should be as independent as allowed by the Oregon Constitution, and that the advocate should be a direct hire of the council. That is the motion before us. So, Steve?
Aye.
Scott? Okay. Tony?
Aye.
Deputy Secretary?
I'm going to go ahead and support the motion, but I need to put on the record my heartfelt desire that we are very deliberate in how we proceed from this point on. But because certainly the Secretary of State's office supports the idea of absolute integrity in the open process and access of citizens to government and government records, I'll be supporting the motion.
Great. And just to tame the chaos when we get have been in attendance, be sure that we get everyone. Stephanie. So folks on the phone, Sharon.
No.
All right, Representative Power.
Non-voting.
Oh, non-voting member, apologies.
No, I'm a non-voting member, as is Senator Thatcher.
Rob?
Yes.
Liz?
Aye.
Let me see if I missed any. Did I miss anyone left?
This is Les, yes.
All right, Michael?
Yes.
Mark?
Thank you. I would echo every word of Deputy Secretary Vial. Yes.
All right, did I miss anybody on the phone? Okay, so we have, as I counted, 8 ayes, 2 nays. So that would mean that the motion carries. All right, so we have that. We have a few more minutes. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Yes, please.
So Christian Wolf, comments. The Healthcare Alliance for Regulatory Board Reform applauds you and your exemplary courage. Thank you, Ms. Hall. Any further comments? We cannot afford to let the crack become too insular. What if we got a counter-purpose group at some point?
Okay. Something to consider at a future point. Anything else? All right, Steve, I think you had something else that you wanted to.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that the council supports the concept of a standalone funding source for the public records advocate that is not federal funding.
Okay.
Steve, this is Mark Landauer. May I ask a question of your proposal for clarification, please? Would this proposal be for the 2020 session, or would it be for the long session in 2021?
I don't really have a strong opinion on that. It's a question of how, I mean, this is a more complicated issue, and it's going to take to accept that.
And we do have also a subcommittee that we proposed in the last meeting that should be investigating that, I believe.
May I speak to the motion?
Sure.
Do we have a second yet?
Steve, okay, sorry, yeah.
Les, I'll just to formalize matters, I'll second Steve's motion.
Okay. Mark, I believe that you had something that you wanted to say about this motion.
Yeah, and this sort of gets back to what I said in my previous statement. I'm just worried that we're rushing to get something done here. I'm perfectly comfortable with this being a topic for the committee to discuss and not to stall or wait, but I'm concerned that we're rushing, and I want to be, I would prefer a more deliberative process by which hopefully we can get to consensus rather than running something that we would do just based on a majority. I think that there are ways to do this, but we have to be smart. We need to take our time. If it means that we actually do come up with something by November, which is mid to late November, when the deadline actually exists for something to get introduced or at least submitted to Legislative Council. I just don't want us to rush, and that's the reason why I would oppose the motion, but remain completely open to any kind of conversation on finding an independent funding source for the advocate's office. Thank you.
And this is Rob Bovat again, and I would just say ditto to everything Mark just said. I think, and I'll just add this, I don't want to dilute our first motion by adding more stuff that we don't necessarily have full evidence was manipulated. I think we need to focus heavily today on independence.
So I go for a left.
Well, this is Les. I mean, I completely understand what Rob and Mark are saying. Steve, as a matter of clarification, I mean, you're simply saying that we, as a council, we ought to explore this issue and this option, right? You haven't set. I didn't hear a particular deadline or time on. You just wanted to put it on the council's work list. Was that correct, or did I misunderstand the motion?
No, thank you for that, Les. That's absolutely correct. What I was hoping for is a commitment to actually have this discussion. This came up at our July meeting. There was a proposal from me to create a subcommittee to discuss this. The only volunteer for that subcommittee was me. I think, so my desire is, I think, and to Rob's point, in terms of I think we need to not merely address the gaps in law that led to the current situation. I think we need to anticipate problems that could arise in the future. And there's certainly plenty of evidence, in the case of the government.
And Steve, this is Mark Landauer. If I interrupted you, forgive me, and I'll shut up. I do believe, though, I give you that commitment, and I would ask for a friendly amendment that the independent funding of the advocate's office be placed high on our agenda upon the hiring of the next advocate. We've got a little bit of work ahead of us, and I think that finding a truly qualified and exceptional candidate is going to be a big undertaking for us, particularly in light of some of the circumstances. And I hope that we can be supportive of this office in any way we can. But I would just suggest that we put this and make this a motion to make this topic very high on the agenda shortly after the hiring of the next advocate.
So sorry, Mark, can you restate your amendment?
That independent, okay, fine. That the independent funding of the advocate's office be placed as the next item on the agenda for our discussion after the hiring of the next advocate.
How about the first priority for the council to discuss after the hiring?
Perfect.
Okay, I'll accept that.
Okay, so Steve, if you want to go ahead and read off the new resolution as amended.
Oh.
My understanding of it was that the council resolved to make investigating an independent funding stream for the Office of the Public Records Advocate the next item on its agenda upon hiring of the next advocate. Does that sound accurate?
That's acceptable, but to me, it's a variant on what you said, Mark, but is that acceptable to you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And you got that right? Okay, perfect. Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I seconded it.
Okay, Les seconds. And again, I'm going to just do a roll call on it. All in favor? Steve?
Aye.
Okay. Scott?
Aye.
Okay. Tony?
Aye.
Deputy Secretary?
Aye.
Okay, I'm going to go through the folks on the phone again. Sharon?
I am going to be a no again, and I want to say for the record that this motion and the prior motion, I agree with what folks have said in terms of wanting to be cautious in terms of how we move forward. I think that the prior motion was very broad in a way that I don't feel comfortable supporting, and I believe that we're moving a little bit too fast in this meeting. So I just wanted to say that to give some context to my no vote.
All right, objections noted. Rob?
Yes.
All right, Liz?
Aye.
Seth? You seconded,
Yes.
Bill. Okay.
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
And Mark?
Yes.
So we have, by my count, 9 ayes and 1 nay. All right.
We have a couple more votes.
Okay, go ahead.
Christian Wolf, previous commenter, we should not rush.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just going to point out that I am aye for both of those votes.
Oh, sorry.
I failed to vote both times. I apologize for that. Sorry, go ahead.
Further notes, all this opacity, it's been around in Oregon for a long time. Reform must be strong. It's not just about Kate Brown. Others laws. There must be real teeth and centrality to the Oregon value of transparency.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Scott, did you want to say something?
I intend to make a motion.
Yes, I think so. Go ahead.
So, my motion is I move that the public records advocate or her designee or is it the vice public?
Deputy.
The deputy, thank you, or the deputy public, but from the appropriate body, whether it be legislative council, the Department of Justice, the Oregon Law Commission, or other executive branch agency, or the public records advocate.
I'm sorry, Scott, you were cutting out a little bit for us on the phone. Could you restate that? I'm sorry.
Have it written down.
Actually, I'll ask Ginger to read that back.
Scott moves that the public records advocate or deputy or designee requests a complete review related to the circumstances of the departure of the public records advocate. What body would you like?
From either the Office of Legislative Counsel, other executive branch agency, Oregon Law Commission.
Okay.
These are all ors, not ands. Or
A little confused, Scott, as to, this is Rich Vile, a little confused, Scott, as to what the objective is and kind of how that might look. If you could explain what you're thinking.
the objective is that some of us have talked about that we want to go, we're concerned about moving too quickly. What I would like to do is make sure that the PRAC has a complete understanding of the circumstances. And the reason I'm doing this is based on history, actually, because in 2007, we had the big ethics reform bill. And in 2008, we found that the implementation was not what people were expecting, and there was considerable blowback. So what was done was that there was a review of the statute done by, I think it was the Oregon Law Commission. It was a long time ago, but
I'm pretty sure it was, because I had the reason went through the testimony from 2007.
okay, so, and they reported back to the legislature and the ethics commission and the stakeholder groups on what went wrong, what happened, and how they, and with recommendations for fixes. I think that's a reasonably good model to move forward here.
Do you know who it was that did that investigation? I would feel more comfortable with this if I knew what my obligations were as a result of this. Like, who is it that does this kind of investigation?
So I think in that case, I think coming back to me, but I believe he's correct. It was the Oregon Law Commission that did that review of the statute. They may be appropriate here. It may be somebody at DOJ. It could be legislative counsel, or even the office of the LPRO office.
And what are we asking them to review, the facts or the law?
We're acting both, actually.
Probably the facts as applied to the law in this case, or the law applied to these facts.
And I will say, as part of my efforts to try to figure out some way to deal with this situation, I did reach out to my DOJ, ask him for an independent evaluation on the independent question. I would be happy to try to take that to someone else as well, if that is the question here. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has about the facts of this situation.
And all I want to know is a complete understanding of what happened and who understood what and when.
You're looking for a third-party report on how this is unfolded.
An objective.
And how long did this 2007 process take place, or take to complete?
It resolved within 6 weeks or so, is my recollection. You'll have to forgive me, this was about over a decade now at this point, but that was my recollection, is that it wasn't overly drawn out.
And I think you're right. I think it was the Oregon Law Commission, and that seems like an appropriate body to take a look at this.
Yeah. I can't guarantee that I will have time to get to that before I leave, but I believe that my deputy, who will be the acting public records advocate, will have it. I'm out next week, and then I have, I think, 2 weeks here before I leave. I have a bunch of things I need to wrap up.
Would you be willing to put a deadline on it, Scott?
60 days
From today?
from,
Or from when they take it up?
Did that cost somebody some money?
Asking for a legal opinion from DOJ would cost money. I don't know about the Oregon Law Commission.
That's why I'm hesitating on the.
I think, can we say explore, and then we can come back to it at our next meeting?
Sure.
With options.
Okay, so.
I don't think that really slows, even though I'm all for slowing down. It's been clear in the vote, what the other members of the commission are doing. I think you will always have a legislative session every year. And whether it's before February or whether it's after, this would uncover a problem, whether it was with conduct or with structure. And that's what I want to know.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So, do you want to tell us?
Can I offer a comment?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
This is Todd Albert. Hi, thank you. Hi, it's Todd Albert. I guess I'm commenting as a member of the public since I'm not a member of the PRAC, but as the person who will be the acting public records advocate once Ginger leaves and until a new advocate is appointed, I would like to suggest for consideration by the committee that it is the council that seeks an opinion from any public body it wishes about the circumstances of the advocate's departure. I think that I'm suggesting that in part because the council is seeking this information to determine what it wants to do in terms of suggesting changes to the structure of the advocate's office and council. But as the acting advocate, I will not be the chair of the council. The secretary of the state will be. And while I'm prepared to assist, participate, and help in any way I can with any investigation, I don't know if your resolution carries and it's for the successor to Ginger to seek this review, that it'd be appropriate that I would be the one seeking it out. I just wanted to offer that to the council for consideration, to perhaps consider making the resolution that someone, perhaps the chair of the council, seeks this opinion.
I think that might be a good idea. I mean, it might be a little bit awkward for a person who has unfortunately started this entire inquiry to be reaching out. So I want to know how others feel about this.
I would simplify. I think listening to Todd, I would suggest maybe I would be willing to amend my motion to say the deputy at the regularly scheduled meeting present potential options for agencies that could conduct a review of circumstances related to the departure of the PRA.
Do you mean deputy secretary or deputy public records advocate? I'm sorry.
The deputy public records advocate.
Okay. So deputy public records advocate should present options for investigation around the circumstances.
Review,
okay. And I will note, as Rob said, I don't know when you want to have that, if you want to have that at our next meeting, or if you want to wait until after hiring, but once I depart, we'll probably have to turn to hiring.
I think there needs to be a temporal reference in the motion, so I would simply say at the next regularly scheduled PRAC meeting.
This is Les. I guess maybe you can help me out. I'm kind of unclear on what the objective is.
The objective is.
So could you clarify that for me?
Well, I think the objective is for the PrAC to have a review of the departure and the circumstances, because I think what that will show is, the question is, how much of this is conduct, how much of it was structure?
Well, with all due respect, though, if
that should inform changes that we make. If it's 100% one or the other, that I think we should know that.
Well, if I may, this is last. So, do you think that would influence our decision about whether this position ought to be independent or not?
I think it could influence any number of things related to.
Could you articulate what those would be?
I think it could influence I think it could influence the council and commission seeks legislation. I think it could influence not necessarily could influence autonomy and accountability. I think it can influence it's hard to say until we have a complete understanding of what happened, and I think that's that's important. Independent, even if the previous motion had failed, I think everyone should have that review.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
This is Tony. Would that review include statements from the former general counsel and the other attorneys?
I would assume so.
I mean, you've expressed concerns, and one of the things I love about this council is the compromise, and I think you're absolutely right that it's worth getting. I want to hear what people said or why or what happened, and so I think it's valuable to hear what everyone said.
I guess, how can anyone be against fact-finding? At the same time, I want to make sure that everybody understands that I think most of us give Ginger the benefit of the doubt.
Absolutely.
She's presented a great degree, as I said before, credible evidence, contemporaneous notes as to what took place in these meetings. And I think it's at the very least enough to disturb us. And again, as I think Les pointed out before, this is not a criminal investigation of, to establish guilt. I think there's enough credible evidence for us to take action, and I would support. I suppose I will be supporting this motion, but with that caveat that this is not meant in any way to cast doubt on the council.
And I don't intend I don't intend the motion to be taken that way either. I think this is simply due diligence.
This is Les, if I may speak to the motion. Has there been a second to the motion?
I second it.
Okay. I will oppose the motion, which I know is unusual for someone who spends his life investigating government agencies. But I think the issues before the council are clear. I think diverting attention to revisiting what so far is undisputed history distracts time, energy, and attention from the principal missions of this council, which is to serve the public interest and access to government. And so I will be clearly a minority voice, but I don't see that the results of such a review would materially influence this council's considerations of the issues that we've been discussing for the past hour and a half. With all due respect, Scott.
This is Mark Landauer. I'd just like to speak to the motion as well. Scott, I tend to support the whole idea of getting behind the facts, as previous speaker noted. Can't oppose getting to the facts here, but I don't think that is our role. I do think it is a distraction. I have some concerns about who would be doing the investigation. How would that investigation be paid for? I think that's we're rushing to judgment here a bit, and rather than distract us, I too will humbly oppose the motion at this time, but remain open to further discussions down the road. I think this is a rush job, particularly if it's going to be a part of our next meeting. Thank you.
And this is Rob Bovett, and I just want to say ditto to what Mark said.
I just have a question. When we're talking about the next regularly scheduled meeting, it was my hope that this body could meet again in 2 weeks to discuss potential legislative language. After we pass this resolution, I think the next step should be to discuss that. So my question is whether or not this requirement that the deputy CRA should present options for review of circumstances at the next regularly scheduled meeting. Does that mean that meeting, or does that mean after the hiring? Because the hiring is going to take place probably soon after that meeting. We'll have to get to hiring. So I'm just trying to get a sense of the timetable.
So the motion is that Todd would come up with options to present. I would be concerned that 2 weeks would not give him, given the other duties and the other turmoil that may be existing in the office due to the departure, sufficient time to devote to that. So I would say at the meeting. We're scheduled to meet in November?
We're scheduled to meet, which will probably be my last meeting.
Okay.
October 1st, right?
Yeah. So if I would defer to Todd to see if October 1st would give him, and if the answer is no, that's fine.
Todd, do you have any thoughts on that? Are you still on the line?
Hi, I am still on the line. A simple answer is no. I do not think, given my other duties, I'd have the ability to adequately present options on October 1st.
Okay. I'd like to speak to the motion once more. All that has been said now by Rob and Mark and Les and now Todd leads me to reconsider my support for this. I'm with them. I think it's a distraction.
Anyone else have any comments? Okay. We'll go around the room first, as we have been doing, and then I'll go down the list of folks who are on the phone. Steve?
No.
Sorry, let me just. Sorry, so I have one name. Scott?
Aye.
Okay. Tony?
Aye.
Deputy Secretary?
No.
All right, folks on the phone, I have Sharon.
Aye.
Rob?
No.
Liz?
No.
Les?
No.
Michael?
I think I'm going to abstain from this vote.
And I suspect that's because DOJ might be one that might be asked.
Correct.
Indeed.
Okay, sorry, Mark?
To the motion, I'm a no. Thank you.
I am also going to abstain because I'm really close to this and probably shouldn't speak to this issue. All right. Does anyone else have any other motions?
Wait, what was the outcome?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Aye, 3, nay, 6, abstentions 2. So the motion would not carry. Does anyone else have any other motions that they would like to put forward?
I'd like to move that the council support the resolution drafted by council.
Okay, and everyone should have that in front of them.
I will second that. This is Les.
It would be, I think this.
Is this one?
Can you please repeat the motion?
You want to repeat the motion?
Sure, this is Steve Duo. Tony Hernandez had presented a resolution prior to this meeting titled "A Resolution on Public Service Impact and Gratitude," and my motion is that the council support that resolution.
Thank you.
Would it be appropriate for Tony to read that out loud? What does the folks think?
It's pretty long.
It is pretty long.
Could I perhaps? Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Someone was speaking.
Well, this is Mark Landauer. Just a quick question, if I may, of the Deputy Secretary. Would it be appropriate for the council to file that with the Secretary of State? Thank you.
Certainly, this is Rich. Certainly, submitting that as part of the proceedings of this meeting would make it a public record, and it would be accepted by our Archives Division into the public record. I will also add at this point that because the statement contains a lot of factual background that I and the current Secretary of State are not privy to, we would need to be abstaining in this particular case.
This is Michael Crone, and I'm sorry, I am actually on my way to a concert with my wife at this point. But I would just like to say, first of all, that I am very grateful to Ginger for her ambition and the independent spirit she brought to the work. The resolution, frankly, is really long-winded and political, and I don't particularly love it, but I am grateful to Ginger. I probably won't be around for your vote on this motion, however. So, goodbye, everyone.
And this is Mark Landauer again. And I would humbly ask that perhaps we reconsider the motion and have something drawn up that members of the PRAC are all comfortable with and can be supportive of. I really would like to send a strong message of support for the work of Ginger, but there is some politics in there, if I may say so myself as well. And I'd really like to focus more on the great work that she has done than some other, shall we say, distractions. Thank you.
And this is Rob. Oh,
go ahead,
sorry,
Rob.
Les. This is Rob Bovett. I just want to say again, I'm repeating myself. I want to say ditto to what Mark said, and what was said before. If we could kick this to the next meeting, Ginger will still be there. I think we need to do something as a council to acknowledge and honor her amazing service to the state of Oregon. But I'm not so sure we're ready to get into all that language that Tony set forth. I might want to make a tweak here or there. And as I recall, Tony even had some pieces in there he wasn't sure of the language. So I just don't think we're ripe yet.
Okay.
This is Les. I agree after listening to the discussion. I'll withdraw my second on the provision that we circulate some modified draft that we get this down to 250 words or 300 words for consideration by the council in the next public session.
And Les, this is Rob again. I don't mean to keep interjecting like I do at our meetings, but I don't want us to violate public meetings law and all this stuff. So circulating a draft could be problematic. Here's my suggestion, that Ginger send it out again to everybody and you respond with your comments and suggestions just back to Ginger. I don't want us engaging in a circular email conversation and walking into a violation of public meetings law.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate that. It's a good point.
So I don't know whether I need to withdraw my motion, but I will. All that sounds good. I wonder if we could simply have a motion that says the council strongly endorses the public service provided by Ginger McCall to the state of Oregon.
I would second that.
Just dropping it off.
All in favor?
This is Steve, yes.
Okay, Scott?
Aye.
Okay, Tony?
Yes.
Deputy Secretary? On the phone, I have Sharon?
Aye.
Rob?
Yes.
Liz?
Yes.
Yes.
Michael has departed for senior pastures. Mark?
Yes.
I think I should probably abstain. So, thank you all. Anyone have any further business?
I think they're running out of steam.
I have to say something, and I'm not sure if this is appropriate, but I would feel guilty if I didn't say it. And I said something similar to the governor. I do not hold the governor's policy advisor, Emily Madison, responsible for any of this. It was clear to me that she was a young attorney who was listening to orders that she had been given by the supervisor. And I just want to be clear about that. I think it would be very unfortunate if she were to suffer repercussions because of this. Thank you all. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Okay, so move.
Second.
All right, I'll just ask if anyone to vote.
Acclamation.
Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you all very much. And I will be emailing you again about potentially meeting 2 weeks from now so that we can continue to work on this issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you to members of the public.
Thank you.